so glad you're here. And I'm glad that you've taken this journey with us all the way through. And we're going to take it even deeper today and talk all through gut things. But first, I want to introduce Ori Goldstein. If you missed his talk, you need to go back, buy the VIP pass and watch it because it is just so amazing. And he is kind of a business partner of mine and a collaborator and a friend. So great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah. So we're going to be mostly me talking about gut things, but I think you're in a unique perspective or in a unique space to interview me because some of this stuff might really interest you. You know, you're not a clinical practitioner like some of our other speakers. So I think you'll bring the questions that everybody's been asking in their mind or what they want to be asking. And I think it's going to be great.
That's the stuff I'm really, really excited about. I looked at all the presenters you had, and they're absolutely amazing. And I love the fact that you asked me to do this because, firstly, I love the relationship we've created. You've become one of my favorite people in the world. But I've dealt with a whole lot of different things, diet and gut related, throughout my whole life. And so I think that the questions I'm going to ask will probably be more specific to people watching more so than the experts talking. So I'm really excited about this.
So, throughout this entire summit, we've been really talking about the hormone gut connection, and every conversation has been almost more hormone driven, but then talking about what might be fueling that hormone imbalance. And so a lot of that discussion has been around gut dysfunction of some kind. And I want to bring that all together today and give you really practical tips for what is that? I'm having this symptom. So what does that mean? And what do I do about it? Right? I want you to leave with really actionable steps and not feel lost.
I got so many questions for you. It's like, so you're talking
Yeah.
about like this whole idea of the hormone connection and the fact that you've got like so many gut symptoms. But like when you talk about an imbalanced gut, what the heck does that actually mean? What are the specific things that would cause an imbalanced gut? How does this all come about?
So in our first discussion, in the very first presentation of this entire summit, we talked about what does a balanced gut look like? How do you set your gut up to be optimal, right? But then also what can go wrong and what's going to cause that gut dysfunction. But on kind of a greater, more broad sense, a dysregulated gut or an imbalanced gut it does kind of come down to the microbiome, in which we talked about again in that first session. So the microbiome is the collection of bacteria and yeast and viruses and all those tiny little bugs that make up, the inside of our GI tract, right? So we want a nice balance. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows. It's not going to be 100% good bacteria all the time, but it's an ecosystem. So we want mostly for there to be good bacteria that are benefiting us in so many ways. There will be bad bacteria in there, but we want to keep them at bay. We don't want them to overgrow in some sense. So where we run into trouble with gut dysfunction is when those good bacteria overgrow, or it can be a yeast overgrowth, a parasitic infection. There can be things in your environment or in your diet that are causing just general inflammation of the GI tract. There can be a lot of different things that can cause dysfunction, which is why it's so frustrating for people. When they've dealt with gut symptoms, they're like, where do I even where do I even go?
And that's really
so
it. Like,
complex.
People talk about an imbalanced gut and it just means everything to everyone, right? You just go on social media and everyone talks about it. But like, what are some specific symptoms in that case? What is it that a person should be looking out for? Like, is it just a matter of like, I feel a bit bloated? How do you know that this is something that's going on for you?
I think most of the time, because some people ask me that, like, how do I know if I have an imbalanced gut? And I'm like, well, you're probably going to know. You're going to have some symptoms that manifest. So that could be something like a, bowel schedule that's not ideal. So if you're pooping once every 3 days, probably not great. If you're having a bowel movement 6 times a day, probably not great, right? If you have a lot of stomach pain.
Let me ask you that. How many bowel movements should a person have? Is there a specific number, or is it just a matter of like, I'm just different from what I was 5 years ago and maybe I was messed up then too? How do you know?
Creating dysfunction for dysfunction.
Right?
Yeah. So generally, as a rule, having a daily bowel movement is ideal. You want to be getting your stool out at least once a day. Up to like 3 times a day can be normal too. It really just depends, because sometimes if you're having 3 bowel movements a day, it can be completely healthy, or it could mean that your body's having a hard time getting it all out at once. And so it's kind of coming out in these little pieces, if you will.
So it's also about like the size. I hate to discuss these things, but this is what we're talking about, right? So it also has to
Yeah.
do with like the size, the consistency. So what makes
Yeah.
for a healthy bowel movement?
Love it because I talk about poop every day and I'm like not weirded out. I am the person at parties, I will probably ask you about your poo and people are like, who let that girl in here? Like, what is she doing here? And why is she asking about my bathroom habits? And because I find it to be just so fascinating and normal. And then there's people like you who get a little squeamish. You're like, oh, so do we talk about poo?
The thing I love about this interview is I finally get to ask these questions because it's not something that I even feel comfortable talking to a doctor about sometimes, right? I was actually listening to a talk a while ago about like some movie star or something that said after he got married, he was on the toilet. And as he walked out the toilet, his wife was like, should I take you to the hospital? He's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, that's not normal. And that's when he finally found out that what was going on for him wasn't normal. So I love that I've got someone that I can ask. So yeah, please let me know.
So what you want is you want it to be able to have your stool come out in kind of one long log, if you will. So think like sausage, fully formed. You don't want those little pebbles, the little balls. You don't want it to be obviously liquid. You don't want it to be super mushy. Ideally, you're not having to wipe a lot as well. Obviously you want to wipe, but not, it shouldn't be like a 6 wipe situation. Sometimes that can lead to it can be a hint as to what dysfunction is going wrong as well. So you want it should be easy to pass. It should be pretty scheduled in terms of like, oh, it's 7 a.m. Here I go, and it should come out in one kind of long snake, if you will. So that's really the ideal scenario. If you have bloating that is so significant that you feel like you need a different pair of pants, not normal. A little bit of stomach distension after eating is normal, but it shouldn't feel so severe. You shouldn't look 6 months pregnant. I lived through that. I had, this horrible bout of food poisoning that caused literally night and day. It was the worst food poisoning I've ever had. We were in like a dive bar after going to this really nice seafood restaurant, and we got to this little dive bar and it like hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I was getting sick, like head in the toilet of this nasty dive bar in town. I'm like, that was the worst experience of my life. And if you've ever had food poisoning too, it's hard because you're like, okay, do we get in the car? Like, how long until the next time I have to throw up? Like, we have to get home. I can't continue to keep throwing up in this dive bar toilet because it's gross, right? But like, what do you do? Anyway, it was the craziest, wildest experience. But after that is when I developed such severe gut issues. And that really, I already had a passion for gut health. But after I experienced this stuff firsthand, I was like, oh gosh, the fact that anyone is living this way, like I have to help the world. I have to help everybody because this is awful.
So you just said something that really got to me. You said like you had one event and then all of a sudden you developed severe gut issues. If you talk about like gut issues, like let's just say something happens to you and then from that point forth, you've got chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea. Let's just choose one. Let's just say chronic diarrhea. What does that point to? Like, did you have some kind of bad food and do you need to take some kind of pill or do you need to help balance things inside of yourself? So diarrhea, for example. How do you know that something is wrong there?
I think for a lot of people, what we like to do as functional providers is look at your timeline. So I want to know what gut symptoms you're having, but I also want to know when it started. And for a lot of people, they know exactly when it started. There was what we call a precipitating event. So it was a time in their life where they had a job change, they weren't sleeping, they lost their mom, their dog died. It's this point of everything went wrong at one time, and I've never been the same since, right? And that can tell us a lot about what's going on. Like, for example, if you have a bout of food poisoning like I had, the likelihood that you have something called SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is going to be pretty high. But with that comes other dysfunction that needs to be balanced. Or there's something called visceral hypersensitivity that's really common after food poisoning. So that basically just means that you are a lot more sensitive to normal body processes in your gut. So for example, you might have a normal amount of gas production, but you are hypersensitive to the feeling of that. So it's a normal body process, but your brain is interpreting pain, right? It's really tricky. The research is not very far on visceral hypersensitivity, but they're questioning, is that the main difference between people who have, quote, IBS and people who don't? Is it that they just feel everything very intensely? Which is an interesting thought, right? So do I have the normal gas production as you do, but now I interpret that my brain is saying pain where yours isn't even registering because it's like, well, that's fine, right?
I've got so many more questions leading from that, but I'm also curious because I want to make sure that everyone gets something. We spoke about the bottom. Now let's talk about the top. Let's talk about something like reflux, for example. Are there specific symptoms that you look for there, or something that if you know reflux is going on, what may have caused it or something like that?
And we didn't even get to the original question about diarrhea. So we'll get to that too, but let's talk about reflux because that is so common. And reflux can be happening even if you feel like you're not actually kind of regurgitating some acid, right? So some people have silent reflux, which can still be causing issues and it not feel like traditional symptoms. So there's, again, so many nuances here that can really be affecting things. But if you are somebody who struggles with reflux, there are a few foundational things that I want you to pay a lot of attention to. It's number one is always going to be diet. What does your diet look like? Is it that anti-inflammatory? Are you doing a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugar, a lot of alcohol, a lot of things that are causing inflammation, not only to your GI tract, but to your body? That's number one. Number two is stress. You have to manage stress, which this is when everyone's going to close out this video and be like, nope. Let me stop you right there, Brittany. I will do anything you say, but I will not address my stress, right?
Like, or that cannot is manage stress, as I tend to say, right?
Or cannot. I know you have so much to say about that. I know you and I talk about stress a lot. Stress is a huge thing. Sleep is a huge thing. If you are sleeping 5 hours a night, I am not shocked that you have reflux. So that's like those are the basic things that you need to be looking at. It can also come from imbalances like H. pylori is a bug in the gut. That's pretty common. Over half of the population has H. pylori in their gut. It's not a problem for everybody, but it can create reflux-like symptoms, issues with stomach acid, which can kind of turn into those reflux type symptoms. So it's a little bit complex, even something so simple as reflux. But what I see with clients is they come to me on PPIs or these reflux medications. And these medications were never intended for long-term use. When you look at the research behind them, or you look at the general recommendations or the fold-out pamphlets that come with every medication that we immediately drop in the trash, right? They are not, even at 6 to 8 weeks after taking something like a reflux medication, there is severe gut imbalances that can happen. Yet people are on them for 3 decades, 4 decades. And it's like, well, no, there's changes that happen after 6 weeks, right? It's wild. And that can create further issues down the line. So what we see with clients sometimes is it started with reflux, which then they started taking a medication for because nobody helped them determine why they had reflux in the first place. They just said, take this pill.
All root cause you need to get to. But please continue.
Yeah. So they're given this pill, and then that decreases stomach acid, which can create an environment where bad bacteria can overgrow, which then creates more dysfunction and more gut symptoms, which then turns into other gut symptoms. And it's like we're stacking these problems, these gut issues on top of each other when we could have just addressed reflux from the root cause in the first place and avoided all of this dysfunction.
This blows me away because I'll just tell you a little bit of a personal story. Like my girlfriend wakes up, let's say 3 to 4 times a week. In the middle of the night, she just wakes up choking, and because of acid reflux. And she went to see a gastroenterologist, and he basically is going to be doing the endoscopy, but is also telling her that she'll probably be on whatever the blocker is for the rest of her life.
Omeprazole
and
or
it drives
something.
me crazy that she says that. I love the fact that you're saying that you got to go deeper into a root cause, for example. So with that being said, reflux you kind of got to, and you say we're going to go back to diarrhea. What are the root causes there?
Again, with everything, there's so many options that could be causing it. I always tell people, if I line up 10 people with diarrhea, they're all going to have a slightly different root cause. And then there's a root cause to that root cause, right? So for diarrhea, first things that I think about are malabsorption. So is your body not able to digest and absorb the foods that you're eating? And then again, that's maybe a kind of a root cause, but there's a root cause to why you're not absorbing. So is it that you're not creating enough enzymes? Is it that your stomach acid is off because you've been on, PPIs, the reflux medication for so long? Is it an H. pylori overgrowth? What is it that's causing that malabsorption of food that you're intaking? Can be parasitic infections. I see that it is less common than people think. Now on Instagram, everyone, it's like everyone needs a parasitic cleanse, and they don't. Like, you heard it from me. Please don't buy a parasite cleanse, because oh man, that could be a whole nother like hour conversation about that. But often it's much more basic than that, right? But parasitic infections can cause that, an imbalance, what we call dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. So good bacteria is low, bad bacteria is high. That can cause it. There's a specific type of bad bacteria that in and of itself is inflammatory. So gram-negative bacteria is what they're called, and they grow something on the outer, this is just fascinating, I think. They grow something on the outer shells of their bodies called lipopolysaccharide. It's just like how we grow fingernails, right? It's just part of who they are.
So it's like a shell on a bug kind of thing almost that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I just had this weird image of bacteria with like long fingernails, and now I can't get it out of my head. But yes, so it's just something that's part of the outer shell of their body. And the LPS itself is very inflammatory for our bodies. So just that simply existing, just those bacteria simply existing in your gut in those high amounts can cause an immense amount of inflammation, and that can cause those looser stools as well. Talked about malabsorption. People will always point to food sensitivities, and I want to get to that later because it's like a whole other topic.
I have questions about that for sure.
I know. And you can be having a physical reaction to the food, but it's not a root cause approach. So we talked a little bit about diarrhea and reflux and kind of what might cause those. I want to talk about constipation and bloating because I feel like those are huge things. And that's honestly what was part of my journey too. And the bloating is something that when you've not experienced severe bloating, you think, but you look fine, you're small, right? And you get that whole, you're like, no, that's not the problem. I'm not necessarily worried about how my stomach looks. I'm concerned about how it feels. It's so uncomfortable. I mean, I would wake up bloated in miserable, in pain. And it was just this terrible experience. And so what are we looking at what might that indicate? The constipation piece is tricky. The first thing we look at is, are you eating enough food in general? Undereating will lead to constipation. So, and I see that often with my female clients because they're also trying to lose weight or, they're doing all of those things. So that can be part of it. A way that you can support if you are constipated is to support your migrating motor complex or your MMC, which is having you're like, yeah, I know exactly what that is.
Yeah, MMC, exactly.
It is to, instead of snacking all day, you want to have 3 structured meals so that you have what you're doing is allowing your GI tract to have a complete cycle where it's pushing things through, where it's pushing things down. So when you're eating snacks, when you're introducing some food into your body, it stops that cycle. So if you're constantly snacking and you're grabbing something here and grabbing something there, you're never really going to get things pushing down to where it needs to go because an entire cycle isn't completing. So trying just the 3 meals a day, of course, looking at fiber and fluid, that's usually something people have tried already. And one point that I want to be really clear about is the fluid piece. So some people say, well, I'm never thirsty. And I'm like, well, it doesn't mean your body doesn't need water. It just means that you have overridden your thirst cues for so long, or your body is trainable. Your body knows what you have, like the way that you have lived. So for me, hydration is, I'm the worst at hydration, literally the worst. I always have my health coach. I'm like, counsel me on hydration, right? Like, tell me what to do. So the hydration piece, it's like I have underconsumed fluids for so long that my body is like, why are we even trying to send her a thirst cue? Like, she's not listening. Let's just down regulate all of our body processes to use the amount of water that's coming in wisely. Right? So we need this much water, but homegirl's only given me this much and we're just going to work with it. Right?
And then there's a few questions I got for you about that actually. Like some people go like, well, I drink enough coffee or tea, Or what do you think, for
Mm.
example, about electrolyte stuff or flavored things?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, how does that fit into hydration?
So everything fits. They used to say caffeine doesn't count because it's a diuretic. So as much as you're drinking, you're peeing out. Honestly, it all counts, but I don't want you to be pounding coffee as your fluid. So there's other issues with that, right? With all the caffeine. But I love electrolytes. I drink electrolytes almost every day. It's something that you want to check with your doctor or your provider about because not everyone should have them at the levels that, like I love the Element brand, but it's 1,000 milligrams of sodium, which isn't appropriate for everybody. So, but I love electrolytes. I think, I love Olipop. That counts. Not sponsored. I wish we were. So any of that counts. Herbal teas. So there is a way to get in fluids without it just being straight water. Doing, putting lemon in your water. I love hot lemon water. So there's a lot of ways to get that in. But hydration is so important because you're allowing your body to not have to pull fluid from the stool. And this is actually really fascinating and a misconception. People think that the reason you need water if you're constipated is because it's going to flush out the stool, right? They think in their minds, they're like, I'm going to drink this water and it's all going to come out, right?
Yep.
And that's not necessarily the benefit there. The benefit is that when stool is sitting in the colon and waiting to be expelled, your body is constantly absorbing things from it. So it's absorbing nutrients if you're low on vitamins and minerals and, it's absorbing water. And so the reason that your stools get really hard when you are constipated is because the stool has been sitting in your colon for so long that the body has had so much time to pull water out of the stool because you're not drinking enough. It's like trying to get it from anywhere that it can. So the beauty of drinking enough water is that your body doesn't have to pull it from the stool. It's not necessarily that it's going to flush everything out. Does that make sense? So that's
Got it.
something I always when I learned that, I was like, that's fascinating. Because I thought it just like, whoop, just push it on out. No, that's not how it works. So that's really important if you're constipated. Some common causes that we see again of that constipation. We talked about not eating enough. Sometimes it's actually not having relaxation in the morning. If you get up and you like hit the ground running and you
That makes
never
sense.
are sitting and like in calm and peace, your body doesn't have, and I think we talked about this with our pelvic floor PT in one of the sessions, that it's just important to carve out just a short amount of time in the morning for your body to be like, we're good, we're safe, let's poo. Right. That can be a piece. You can have methanogen overgrowth, which can lead to constipation. There's some other things there too, but those are the biggies. It can be anatomical too, which is hard because there's nothing I can do about your anatomical colon, right? And the way that it's winding and twisting. But there are ways that we can make sure that you're still having a daily bowel movement. So in that case, we would just kind of band-aid our way through it, knowing that there's nothing we can change about your anatomy. And it kind of goes hand in hand, that constipation and bloating go hand in hand, because generally with constipation, there's going to be some bloating. And you can also have, if you have bloating so severe, like I was explaining earlier, it might be SIBO. It might be small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which again isn't a colon issue. It's more in the upper GI tract part. But that can create, depending on the type of bug, that can create constipation and it can create bloating. Bloating can also be caused by maldigestion of food, by H. pylori. So there are a few things, but also just not chewing well. Not really sitting in a relaxed environment, your nervous system being upregulated, and your body can't really focus on digestion, that can create those issues as well.
And something else I'm curious about, like heard it from a few other people too. What happens if you go through a cycle of constipation and then diarrhea, constipation, diarrhea, that kind of like alternate between them? Is that a specific thing or is that just what happens in the body?
So usually it is a combination of things. So when I see that, typically it's like a few problems stacked on top of each other. So this problem might be more constipation causing, and that problem might be more diarrhea causing. And they're kind of fighting with each other. You kind of have both things. So that can be really complex. That can be a situation where, it's like that it does feel overwhelming for you. It does feel like you can't find resolution because it might just be more complex than what you can figure out on your own in a timely manner. And I included our free root cause assessment with every registrant here. So because of this exact reason, I want you to be able to look at a quiz, check off some symptoms, and have a really clear direction of what my root cause might be. right? And then there's this beautiful PDF document which outlines what that might mean for you with specific action steps. And it's a great place to start because I want clients when they come to us to have tried some things on their own. I don't want you to just have constipation for 1 week and be knocking on my door like, hey, how do we fix this? It's like, well, no, try to do things on your own. Try to increase fluids, try to look at fiber and see where you get. And when you get stuck, or when you are so completely overwhelmed that you just don't even know where to turn next, that's when you enlist the help of a practitioner.
And also take it back one thing about the hydration. Like, I mean, like, is there what's it, 8 glasses of water a day or something like that? Is that an actual number or is that just folklore at this point?
Good question. So I told you, I'm a research nerd. I'm always in the research. And at one point I was like, all right, I'm never thirsty. Maybe I just don't need water, right? Like for me, I'm like, let me find research to support that I don't need to drink water. And the research is so vague on hydration, truly. Like we don't have an exact metric, which we don't really have exact metrics for nutrition either. We just choose a number that's like the best guess we have, right? The best educated guess. But for fluid, the rule of thumb that we think might be the most accurate is about half of your body weight in water. So you take pounds, your body weight in pounds, divide by 2, and that's how many ounces you need. Of course, there's going to be issues with that. So if you feel like you have a lot of adipose tissue or fat tissue, it might make that number look really overwhelming. So you can also take like a reasonable goal weight. Don't make it like your high school weight, but like an actual weight that, would be healthy for you. And then you can use the equation there.
If you drink a lot of water and you find yourself running to the bathroom all the time, does that mean that you are drinking too much or is that just your body getting used to it?
This is exactly what I'm putting together for our Shift community actually right now. So it's funny you asked. Oh. I know. So generally what that means is probably not that you're drinking too much water, but that your body can't absorb and use the water you're drinking. So that's a situation where we would look at electrolytes and we would look at minerals. Because if you're drinking a ton, but you're also peeing multiple times an hour, I don't necessarily want you to stop drinking the fluid, but we need to make sure that your cells are able to use the fluid that you're drinking.
That makes perfect sense. You keep talking about the root cause approach. And like I said, the gastroenterologist is like, we'll just put you on these blockers, whatever it is. So you've obviously created like a very specific root cause approach of dealing with things. Can you explain what that's about and why it's different from like someone else's kind of approach?
A dietitian first and a functional provider second, right? So everything that I am doing is ultra food focused. We will never work with a client without first talking about food because that is what's influencing your health in such a major way. And so is the gut, but we can fix a dysregulated gut with supplements and we can do all these fancy protocols, but we also need to fix the environment that made you sick. And that's such a huge thing that I want people to understand because they just want to do a stool test and they want a supplement protocol and they don't want to focus on sleep and they don't want to manage their stress and they want to keep eating what they're eating. They just want me to fix them. Okay, right?
And I'm like, penny drop for me. So like, I just figured it. So like when you said root cause, my whole logic was, it's the bacteria, but you're not even talking about that. That's just a symptom that needs to be treated. When you say root cause, you're actually talking about like the lifestyle. Is that correct?
There's a root cause. So everything, we're always looking at what is the deepest root cause. So the root cause to your diarrhea is a microbial imbalance. Okay, but that's not even the root cause. We need to figure out why you have the microbial imbalance.
I love that.
Right? So it's like for a lot of practitioners, they stop there. They say, oh, it's a parasitic infection. Okay, well, what allowed their body to harbor the parasites and overgrow, right? So we're always looking for, I don't just want to fix you and send you out the door. I want to fix you for good. Like I want you to never struggle with this again. And that's where that concept of, again, we have to heal the environment that made you sick. If you keep on living the way you're living, you're not sleeping, you're not managing stress, you're over consuming alcohol, you're not eating a variety of foods. Yes, we can fix your SIBO, but it's all going to come back again. And you're going to have to invest in your health again. And you're going to have to, you'll be on that cycle.
I swear, it's like pennies starting to drop for me now. The whole time I was sitting there thinking, you're just going to fix the problem. But you're basically saying that you're going to make the person strong enough that the problem can't exist in their body any longer in the same way. once you
Yeah.
fix the problem, it can't come back is the whole difference. And then they can't get it. So the idea of a parasitic infection, the body was weak enough to not be able to fight off the parasite in the first place. Therefore, they got a parasitic infection. Is that correct?
Do we all have parasites in our body? Yeah, probably. But they can live in harmony depending on the parasite, right? And our body is resilient. And that is such an important thing because so many clients come to us, and I know they come to you too, thinking my body is broken. My body is this delicate little thing that if I eat one bite of bread, it throws everything off. If I have one night where I eat nachos, then it's all, and it's like, no, 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 no. Your body is so resilient. It is designed to heal itself. It is designed to stay alive. Like the things that it does to keep you alive and the insults that it can handle. Think of if you're watching this and you think, man, yeah, I've been really under fueling for decades. I've been pounding wine. I'm not managing stress, not sleeping. Yeah. How long have you been doing that? And guess what? You're still alive. How amazing is that, right? Like that's remarkable. That's like literally beating up your car, barely giving it any gas, never getting maintenance on it, never changing the tires, and it still is getting you from point A to point B. How amazing, right? And so I think that's such an important thing to think about when you're thinking and coming from this place of my body is so delicate. I can't even handle an onion. I can't even do this. No, not the case, right? There is a way out of that. And we need to bring the resiliency back to your body because then your body can truly repair and heal itself and keep all of this from happening again in the future. So going back to that question of what is our approach? Again, it is nutrition first. We focus on that because that is what's going to lead to sustainable health, not only with your gut, but with your hormones, with longevity, with just your energy levels, with how you feel, how your skin looks. It all comes back to nutrition. And that was a through point in all of these summit speakers. Everybody is talking about, like, at the end, we're like, okay, what's an action step? Literally every person went back to nutrition. And there's a reason for that, right? Because we are all focused on root cause approach. And you can't talk about healing the gut or healing hormones or doing any of these things without talking about food. And we see practitioners do this all the time. And it's the thing that infuriates me because clients come to me and they say, I invested 10 grand in this program over here. And I say, cool, what did your protocols look like? And they'll send them to me. And it is pages and pages of supplements. And I'm like, okay, what'd they tell you about diet? Well, I kept asking about diet and they told me just to do what I'm doing. And I'm like, no,
Just shove more pills in the
right?
body, right? That's all that it takes.
I see that, functional medicine, there's such a spectrum of functional practitioners. And the trend that I don't love is that a lot of them are using supplements in the way that traditional medicine is using medication. And they're claiming to be natural, but we're natural approach. We're root cause. Well, yeah, but you're giving supplements when you could be adjusting things with diet. You can't out supplement a bad diet. You can't out supplement not managing stress, not sleeping. None of that works. And that's part of our kind of proven framework too. I just mentioned the sleep and the stress. That's in addition to the nutrition. If you're walking around as a little stress ball all day and you're really anxious and you're, holding your body really tight and your cortisol is constantly spiking, do you think your body is going to run optimally? No, absolutely not. Your body is in panic mode 24/7. Do you think it's going to prioritize digesting that cheeseburger you just ate? No, ma'am, right? Not going to happen. And so that alone, stress alone, can trigger gut issues, which I don't think people really connect with. But I have my clients do a ton of experiments and they can make that connection for themselves to see how, yeah, on the days when I am ultra stressed or I had a fight with my spouse or my boss came in and yelled at me or whatever it is, I had the worst bloating of the entire week that night. And they're busy thinking it must have been that piece of bread that I ate. Right? Oh, it's probably that one bite of donut that I had. That's why I'm so bloated. And they come to me saying this, right? I notice when I do, and I'm like, okay. Or they say, I have all these gut issues, but I can't pinpoint the food that's causing it. And I say to them, it's because it's not the food that's causing your symptoms. If you can't pinpoint a particular food, the food is not the problem. And so what I have them do is shift their focus When they are, in the evening and they're so bloated and they have all this stomach pain or they had a lot of loose stools, instead of their brain going immediately to what food did I eat, I have them instead shift that to what was my day like in terms of nervous system? Was I calm? Did I have time to myself? Was I running around? Was I eating while I was walking around? Did I eat in the car? Was I tasting my food? And every single time when the clients say, I can't pinpoint a food, and I have them shift that, they're like, oh, right? That, yes, I can think of that one day on Wednesday, I was so miserable. And let me tell you about Wednesday, right? And they go through this entire story of how terrible that day was. So that is such a huge point, again, of what we try to get clients to understand, that it is not just about the food, it's the entire environment that your body is in.
It's so funny because you obviously know me well enough to know the fact that I'm all about the idea of balance. But at the same time, we've discussed a little bit, but I'm so into biohacking. So I'm always looking for the one pill that will make a difference, for the one thing that will absolutely like shift me in the right direction. And the thing that's kind of like dropping for me now is the idea of the fact that I've never looked at the idea of healing my body in this way, at that way, in terms of like treat it the same way that you would treat your mind, in terms of like create the healthy environment whereby the problem doesn't exist in the first place. And like, I know we even discussed, like, there's that guy that I because I'm into biohacking, it keeps showing up on my feed, like Detox Foods, for example, that's all about dealing with parasites. I see all these ads for all these different things. And I mean, so you do not do the same as these people, right? I mean, you don't look at it in the same way at all.
Oh, I feel like we are so different from other functional practices because we approach gut health specifically and health in general in such a different way. So what I find, because about probably 70% of our clients have worked previously with a naturopath, another functional provider. So we're getting them like second round, third round. Sometimes, I mean, I have a client right now, I am like his 10th practitioner that he's seen, and the only one who has found him results. The only one. And he's invested thousands.
I don't want you to toot your own horn here because people think that I'm doing this on purpose because that's what it is. But what did you do differently?
There's so many things. So number one is what we already talked about, focusing on does your body have everything it needs to heal? So nutrition resiliency, does it have enough nutrients? Not just macronutrients, not just calories, but what about the vitamins and the minerals? If you've been on a food elimination diet for a decade, do you think you got some deficiencies going on? Yeah, probably so. For this particular client, he was down to like, I don't know, 10 foods that he was eating, and he'd been eating them for years. So of course your body isn't going to repair. It doesn't have what it needs, right? How's it going to build tissue if there's nothing to build tissue with, right? So I think that's a huge thing. The other thing that we do that's so different, and especially for him, is once somebody is labeled with something, and we see this in traditional healthcare too, once somebody is labeled with, let's say, a Candida infection, there's the first practitioner says, oh, Candida, let's fix it. And then that doesn't work. And then they just usually do it harder, right? They're like, oh, if that didn't work, let's just do more of the thing that didn't work, which is just bonkers in the first place. But then the next practitioner that you move to, you say, oh, I have a Candida infection and this didn't fix it. And what do you think they do? They say, I do this for a Candida infection, right? And it, from practitioner to practitioner, everybody assumes that the problem is a Candida infection. And then they come to me and I'm like, listen, if all of those things didn't work to clear the Candida, maybe it's not a Candida infection. It's like mic drop. And people are like...
So the thing is, it would possibly be a Candida infection, but you're saying that you have to deal with the thing before the Candida infection in order to ever clear it. Or you're saying maybe they're just wrong.
Or it's not even a Candida infection. Because again, each practitioner is just assuming that that first person was correct. Right? That was the only thing going on. And so people are just like, oh yeah, okay, well, they're inserting their own practice of what they do for Candida. And then they come to us and I'm like, listen, if none of that is working, what's the possibility that the problem that was diagnosed in the first place is incorrect? Or
please.
Or it was a Candida infection coupled with a bunch of other things, and nobody has stopped to look at you as a brand new case. They're all operating under what was already known. Instead of looking at you straight, just act like I know nothing. And then what is the person in front of me struggling with? Based on my expertise, What is the problem? So for him, he had gone through so many killing protocols. Everybody was just trying to kill this Candida. And then he came to us and I'm like, he's like, okay, when are we going to, actually, no, this is a great story because I said, I think I'm going to take a radical approach to you. And to be honest, he was probably the most complex client I've agreed to work with. And I was a little nervous, right? And if your practitioner doesn't get nervous sometimes about a case, like you need a different practitioner, right? You want a practitioner that's like, oh, this is a challenge, right? And I'm very upfront. I told him, like, I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm making no promises. This sounds really complex, but if you're willing to do it, I am too. Like, let's give it a go, right? And thankfully he did. And I said, well, I'm going to take a completely different, radical approach to what you've had. We're not going to do another killing protocol. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. And it made him a little nervous, honestly, because he's like,
right?
no, I
Everyone
need a
else has
killing
done this.
protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need the supplements. So we actually took a super gentle approach and instead focused on not what's the one food, another food of the 10 that I'm eating that I need to eliminate, but we looked at what can we add in? What are you missing from the diet? And what does your body need to heal and to repair after decades of not feeding it what it needs? So we, again, focused on what can we add in? How can we look at the diet and really add things in? Let's get your sleep optimized. Stress, you manage it really well, but just because you can mentally handle the stress doesn't mean that your body isn't feeling the stress. And so how can we bring that in? So it was this, completely radical approach. And a few months in, he was telling, all of these remarkable wins, literally adding foods in that he hadn't had in decades. On Father's Day, he ate gluten, I think it was a croissant or a muffin or something from a bakery. And he hadn't had gluten in decades because he was terrified. He's like, no, for sure I'm gluten intolerant, right?
Every other
And his
practitioner
daughter
told me
wanted
so,
to,
so I know it for a fact,
yeah,
right?
exactly. His daughter really wanted, I think he went and, had this beautiful little daddy-daughter date, had this muffin and was totally fine. Totally fine. Bowel's completely normal. Just these huge, massive wins. And in one of our check-in forms, I got to get real with them because, we always say, like, how can we support you or what questions do you have? So he literally, in the first question, is listing these amazing wins. Like literally his gut is in the best place it's been in decades. And then what questions do you have? He was like, yeah, when are we going to start doing the work? When are we going to get busy? When are we going to do the things? And so on the call, I'm like, hey, I want to talk about that question. What is there to do? Like, what symptoms are you having now? Right. And a really impactful exercise I have clients do, and I think we've spoken about this before on some level, is having them pretend that they've just dropped into their body and they don't know anything about themselves. All they have is the information today. And so I say, what would you say about your body today, about how it's functioning? And, he had really positive things to say about it. Gut issues weren't even really a thing. You didn't even mention, anyone with gut issues. And I said, okay, think of you a year ago. What would you say about your body then? And it was all of this, gut dysfunction, not working, all of this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, you were there a year ago. And I think your mind is still stuck there. You're still thinking, I am somebody with really severe gut issues. And that's how you're moving through your life. And you can't see that right now you have no gut issues to solve. There's no work to be done. There's no killing protocol we need to do. And it was such an aha moment for him. He was like, I just was, anticipating, like, when are we going to get to work? And I'm like, you're doing the work. Congratulations. You've done it.
And I love that because that's the stuff that we talk about very often just with our
Mhm.
community and everything else. The idea that, like, you can get a person from point A to point Z, and until that they realize it, they're still going to sit there thinking, I'm broken, right? Like, it's like this poor guy was still stuck in this mindset of, I'm never going to get there. And he didn't even realize the fact that he had already gotten in there. I think that is so freaking powerful. But now another question, you're talking about the fact, for example, that he was able to eat gluten, for example, or things like that. You mentioned food sensitivities and that you're not a big fan of it. If a person is sensitive to food, a person is sensitive to food, don't you do like the proper testing to know what to tell them to take and not to take? Or how does that work?
So along those same lines, when we were talking about mindset, for him, it was a huge mindset shift of, he needed to see himself as somebody that was no longer in a body that had gut issues, to really connect with the fact that, like, he's made it. He is in his healing journey. He is no longer in that scrambling to figure out what's going on. And, you asked what makes us different as a practice. And we've talked about so many things, but probably the biggest thing is the emphasis we put on mindset, because you cannot talk about physical health without talking about mental health as well. And part of that goes back to the stress that we talked about. We put so much emphasis on managing stress, but we also talk about your relationship with food. Because if you have been living for decades, constantly eliminating food, seeing food as the enemy, seeing food as I'm going to be in the bathroom constantly with that I think is safe. Oh, this one's kind of iffy. That's not a good relationship with food. I want you to be able to go to a bakery with your daughter on Father's Day and eat a freaking muffin, right? It's like that is so important. And that mindset shift is so much a part of the entire healing journey. So I want you to heal your relationship with food. We also have to do some work on how do we change just the way you're showing up in your life and the stories that you're telling yourself, which I know is something that you really kind of plug into as well. But if you think that your body is broken, that you will never heal, you will never heal. Like I had a client one time who the very first session said, and we rate like how committed are you to this? And it was like a 5 out of 10. And I was like, tell me about that 5, right? How committed are you? You're a 5, but you've invested thousands. Like, what is that? And she just said, I just don't know that it's possible that I can heal. And I wanted to be like, then we have nothing to do here, right? If you think I cannot fix you, what are we going to do? Because everything we do, you're telling yourself it's not going to work. So how is that showing up for you in the habits that you're trying to form, or in, again, the beliefs that your body is feeling in terms of, if you think you will never heal, it is very likely you won't heal. If you think that these supplement protocols aren't going to work, it's not going to work. If you think you're somebody who can't prioritize proper nutrition, you're never going to prioritize proper nutrition. And I know we talked about that in our shift community too, which is all about that mindset piece, right? It's helping people get out of their own way, stop the self-sabotage. And it's helping people understand that, again, the stories you're telling yourself are so powerful. And if you need to start changing the way that you're talking about your body or what you think is possible, and really truly believing it. And I don't know if you have any opinions on, like, does it feel like kind of phony in the beginning? Like, do you tell yourself something if you think it's a lie? Like, there's a lot wrapped up into that. But I want to drive that point home, because if you are telling yourself you're somebody that's terrible at cooking, do you think you will ever be a good cook? Never. It will never happen for you, because the narrative you have is that you're a terrible cook. So when something doesn't go right, you're going to say, it's because I'm a terrible cook. Instead, saying, that wasn't my favorite recipe, but you know what? I'll just try another recipe tomorrow and just keep practicing cooking that chicken.
And I'm willing to bet that
totally different.
I'm willing to bet that the people listening to this right now are sitting there. I used to be that person, right? They're switching off to some degree, and they're going, no, Brittany, but you don't understand. It's not about mindset for me. Like, I genuinely have a physical problem. I cannot eat gluten. It's great that you can tell me that gluten is good for me. My question is, with your history, how much of it is physical and how much of it is mindset? How do they contribute to each other?
That's a good question. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't want to dismiss, there are people who truly cannot have gluten, right? If you have celiac disease, I'm not trying to get you to eat gluten. No, you need to probably avoid it forever. There's some research on Hashimoto's and gluten. So you might be somebody who I say, you know what? I think gluten's out the window, right? Dairy, you might have a true lactose intolerance, but I would say for 99% of my clients, none of that is the case. They've been told because of social media and whatever. Yeah, I know.
99%. Like, you genuinely mean that. Yeah. Like 99%.
100%. Mm-hmm.
So I just want the listeners listening to this to, like, really lock that in. Everyone, and myself included, it's like, no, Brittany, you don't get it. I am that person. But like, if you say 99% are wrong, it just proves how much society has conditioned us to think a certain way.
Totally. And here's the thing that I want to be clear about too. I am not dismissing the fact that you might have a physical reaction when you eat gluten. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not saying what you're feeling in your body is not valid, because it is possible that right now, when you eat gluten, that you are having a physical reaction. You're having bloating, you're having loose stools. But that is not probably your root cause. So what we want to, here's another way to think about that. I am not looking at what food are you eating that you shouldn't be eating. I'm looking at why is your body reacting to that food? Do you see that subtle shift? So for a lot of functional practitioners, they do this entire food elimination diet, or they do low FODMAPs, and they say, see, you're cured. You just eliminated the foods that you were intolerant to. But
Live in
here's
a
what happens.
plastic bubble, and all of a sudden you'll be completely fine in this world, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's what happens. So it starts with gluten. Oh, I don't tolerate gluten. I'm going to cut that out. Then it becomes dairy. Oh, now I'm not tolerating dairy. All right, I'm going to cut that out. Now I'm not tolerating eggs. Cut that out. And these clients go down this trajectory of, now I'm not tolerating this. Now I'm not even tolerating my dairy alternatives. And they get to the space again where they're eating 10 foods. Well, nobody has investigated the root cause for you. Yes, you can continue to eliminate foods, but what kind of a life is that, number one? And number two, wouldn't you rather dig into why your body is reacting to the food so that you can eat all the foods again? I always tell people, like, if your kids want to go on an ice cream date and when it's 100 degrees outside, I want you to be able to do that and not say, mommy can't have ice cream. No, 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 right? I want you to eat all the food that's available if you want. I'm not saying you have to eat like scoops of ice cream every day, but don't you want the option? Wouldn't that be cool? So we're mainly looking at what is the body? What's the imbalance, the root cause that's causing your gut to be so reactive to foods that you're putting in? And that's a very different approach to, again, what a lot of functional providers say. And this is where, food sensitivities, I know we mentioned it earlier. I'm going to bring it back full circle here. That's where food sensitivity testing comes in. We do not run food sensitivity tests in my practice. And that shocks
anyone
a
ever kind of
lot
thing?
of people.
Yeah, like it
Nope,
shocks me.
never. Yeah, never.
What's your logic?
There's a couple, there's a couple of reasons for that. So one is that food sensitivity testing itself is not accurate. So they're doing IgG food sensitivities is what it's called. So the thought is that if your body is creating an IgG antibody, right, to a food, that means that your body doesn't like that food and you shouldn't eat it. But when you look at the actual research, I am a research nerd. I don't look at the companies and see what they're saying about their test. I look on PubMed to see what is Pub's actual academic research saying about what we know about IgGs. And IgG antibodies do not flag for intolerance. They might be flagging for tolerance, meaning instead of, so you eat an apple and your body, it tags the apple, right, with something. That's kind of what an antibody, it's not exactly what an antibody is, but it's an easy way to think about it, right? Your immune system is saying, oh, an apple, okay, I'm going to flag you for tolerance. And the next time I see an apple, I know you're good. I know it's safe. Or I'm going to tag this because it feels dangerous. And every time it comes in, I want my body to react in a very quick way against this. So the premise behind the food sensitivity testing is that the IgG antibodies mean that it's flagging for intolerance, when the research says it might be flagging for tolerance.
So it's very possible that a person shows IgG positive for something. I don't know what the test is, but basically it's the body actually saying this is good for me.
This is safe. And again,
Holy
the
cow.
research is, I know, right? So, remarkable. I'm not making this up. It's like there's research for this. And when I looked into it, I was like, oh my gosh, the lies that are on social media, right?
So to tie this together, like a person could basically be told you are sensitive, your IgG flagged for coconut, whatever it is. And you go, okay, fine, no more coconut for me. And it boils down to the fact that coconut could actually be healing to the body.
Not necessarily healing, but safe.
Wow. That is crazy.
Totally. So that's kind of one piece of that is, again, research it's not a slam dunk saying that if you have IgG antibodies to a food that you need to eliminate it. Again, there's a lot of question marks around that. So the testing itself is not accurate. It's nothing I would ever spend money on. There are more important things to spend money on. The other piece of that, let's assume for a second that it was accurate. So let's assume testing is good. You get your report back and there's 30 foods that you're intolerant to. What that means, it doesn't mean that the food itself is the problem. Again, it just means that your body is reacting to that food for some reason. And the question is, why is your body reacting to the food? Because nobody is really born, I don't want to say nobody. It would be extraordinarily rare for somebody to be born with a true sensitivity to an apple. It doesn't, like, that's not how the body works. Again, it goes back to that your body is resilient, your body is adaptive, and I tell women all the time, like, you grew an entire human being in your body, and then you nourished it for a year with your body. You kept them alive for a year, right? And you think your body can't tolerate an apple? Like, think of the things that your body does. And you think it's so delicate, it's so sensitive that it cannot have an apple. What? Right? And it's so counter to what society tells us, to what Instagram tells us. It's like, oh, it's do this food sensitivity and all of your bloating will go away. And sometimes, again, that's not the case. You want to figure out why your body's reacting. So here's another way I explain this. Let's pretend your gut is on fire, right? No matter what food you throw on that, it's going to ignite the flames. So instead of just limiting the amount of food you're throwing on the fire, you put the fire out.
I love that.
Right? And then it doesn't matter what you're throwing on it. It's fine. And that's what we do with clients. I was literally just looking at check-ins before we started recording. And this client of mine who hasn't had gluten in forever because she's intolerant. It's a true intolerance, right? Like, for real this time. It's actually, for me, it's a true thing. And I told her, hey, we're in a space that I want you to start adding it back in. We've done some really great healing for you. Your symptoms are in a lovely place. Let's trial adding it back in. And guess what? In her check-in form, no response, no reactions to gluten whatsoever.
So she tested intolerant, added in, life is good.
She's somebody who really had a true gluten intolerance.
Wow.
Right? And it happens all the time with our clients. Now, again, I'm not here to say that there's never a situation where we say, dairy for you, it sounds like a no-go, because sometimes we do some gut healing and we go back to that introduction phase and I say, hey, let's test it out. Let's add some dairy in and see how we do. And there is an immediate reaction. Okay, well, you need to continue to eliminate dairy. There is a time and a space where that is the case, but I want that to be proven to me. I'm going to operate under the assumption that you can tolerate everything until I'm proven wrong. But even that, I wrapped up with a client recently who that was the case. Where we left it, her entire life had turned around. Her symptoms, like, she had no gut symptoms. Her energy levels were better. Everything about her life had improved. And she was still eliminating dairy because we determined that was a real cause, real issue for her. And so I told her, hey, we tried it and you're still having reactions. Let's continue to remove it. But periodically, I want you to have a little bit and see how you do, because 5 years out from your healing journey, your gut is in a completely different space than 4 months out. Right? So it's a constant test to say, okay, how much can I tolerate? Can I tolerate a little bit of cheese? Can I tolerate this? And what does that particular tolerance look like? It's going to be very different 5 years from now. So it's not, oh, I am somebody who can't tolerate dairy. It's, nope, I'm just not tolerating some dairy right now, but I can probably add it back in the future. That's the story.
So food intolerances are out. Are there specific tests that you do run with most clients to actually see what's going on? Or is it just like very per client, I decide what's right for them?
This is also what sets us apart from other practices too, because for a lot of practices, they say every client who comes to us gets these $1,000 worth of labs. Everybody gets the same test. Everybody gets all those blood tests. They get the same stool test. They get this test over here. And it can be a huge waste of money because you might not need any of those tests if your diet needs a lot of altering, for example, if you're not managing your stress. I have clients who come in with even severe gut issues, and we don't go straight to testing. I say, well, there's a lot to clean up here. So let's actually don't spend any money on testing and see what we can accomplish with altering diet, managing stress, managing lifestyle. And for some clients, we don't need any testing at all, and we find complete resolution to their really extreme symptoms. Where I bring testing in is when I have a client who has a really good diet, their stress is managed, they're sleeping well, like it seems like the foundational things are good to go, and they're still having overt symptoms. That's when you bring in testing, because it's going to give you a much more streamlined approach to get to resolution faster. Because again, I can line 10 people up with bloating and they're all going to have a different root cause. So this allows us to streamline that a little bit. So stool testing and blood testing are the two biggest things that we run. I do blood tests, maybe some basic ones that your doctor might run, but we take it a step further. So we're looking at deeper inflammatory markers. We're looking at deeper iron recycling markers. There's a lot that goes into that to look at, what's your mineral status like? Do you have fatty liver disease going on? Do you have insulin resistance? All of those are going to slightly change the nutritional plan that we have for you. Because if you come to me for gut healing, we are going to heal your gut, but I'm also going to help with the insulin resistance. I'm also going to help with the fatty liver disease because we're taking a full body approach, and we can do it all together in a way that's not super overwhelming. So the blood labs are really helpful for that. They're really helpful for tracking as well. It's a pretty inexpensive way for clients to see point A to point B. Like, oh my gosh, what I'm doing is making such an improvement. And we have had clients, we have reversed fatty liver disease and insulin resistance in so many clients. And people think it's this year-long thing. No, we've done it in 4 months or less. I mean, it's when you have a targeted plan, it all works so well, right? Because you're not just taking stabs at it. This is the issue. And then as practitioners, we know, okay, this is the remedy. This is what we need to adjust. This is the slight change we need to do in macros, the slight change we need to do in micronutrients to make sure that we are metabolically healthy as well. And when you have that clear, streamlined approach, the timeline for healing is so much shorter because you're not taking a stab at it. It's so abundantly clear. And so that's kind of what those blood labs can show. And then stool tests, I love. Now, here's the thing.
This is what we need to discuss.
Let's talk about poop again.
Can we get a little bit more serious here? So stool test. What does this involve completely? Tell me about a stool test, will you please?
Are you like sweating a little bit?
Let's
You're
talk
like,
about poop, shall we?
So stool testing, yes. So let's talk about the process. And I do want to say too, that a lot of providers, a lot of traditional physicians will say, stool tests, they're all bogus, right? We don't know enough about them. And here's the thing. There is no perfect stool test. There's no perfect stool test. And you have to have a practitioner who understands how to interpret the stool test because we're not looking for an A+. The bugs that are growing in my gut are completely different than your gut. Completely different. Your ecosystem is different than mine. And I don't want our ecosystems to look exactly the same. We're not looking for an A+ based on the testing standards. I'm looking for what is my ecosystem and what's out of balance. And when I'm looking at your stool test, I'm looking at what is your ecosystem and what's out of balance and the trends that I'm seeing. What does that mean about what's going wrong in the body?
From what I've learned about the gut microbiome is that we don't really know exactly like what each bacteria is really about kind of thing. And it's just really based upon accumulated information that we say athletes have this kind of biome, sedentary people have this kind of biome. Like, so what does out of balance really mean? Do we really even know that? And how do you really understand what you're looking at?
Good question. There's groups of bugs. There's like a family of bugs, and then there's the individual bugs. So there is much more research on the families and the individuals, and they all do something different. It's just like within your family, you're all part of the same family, but you're all very different. You're different from your sibling. You guys have different preferences. You have different things that you're good at. It's the same thing with those bugs. And so it used to be so simplistic before we knew all of this about the gut. Your doctor would say, just get something with lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is great, right? And now it's like, well, all the different types of lactobacilli do slightly different things for the body. And you want to match the bacteria, and this is more on like the probiotic front, you want to match the bacteria with the imbalance. So it's not so, I don't even recommend that people take a probiotic every day. And I think we talked about that in the first session. People assume that a gut health dietitian would be taking a probiotic every day, and I don't, because probiotics should be selective to, again, what you're trying to fix. So do you have loose stools? There's going to be particular strains that are more beneficial for that. Do you have constipation? There's other strains that are going to be good for that. Do you have antibiotic-associated diarrhea? There's specific bugs that are beneficial for that. So, but we also know things in general about the particular family. So we know, man, there's so many things to go into. There's so many benefits to the bacteria. They do so many things for the body. even in terms of what they're able to eat, what they're able to produce as that byproduct as well, or what they're able to cleave from our food. There's some food that we cannot digest, and we have to have the bacteria digest it for us. There's vitamins that it produces. I mean, it's so fascinating. I think, of course, that's why I got into this, because I'm like, it's this entire world that we know nothing about. Like, we can't see it. But it really is so impactful.
I've heard those stories. I'm actually curious to know if this is true. They say that if a person has a specific overgrowth of a specific bacteria, then what ends up happening is that they may crave a certain kind of food because that bacteria is almost driving them to want it. Is that a truth? Do you know, or is that just not really the way it works?
I don't know. I haven't looked into the latest research on it. I know people say that a lot about foods, which has been debunked. Like they say, oh, if you're craving chocolate, you're low in magnesium. If you're craving whatever else, you're low in, and the research doesn't support it, but I don't think the research tells us everything either. Are there things we just don't quite understand, especially with gut health? It's such a new science compared to what we've known about the heart, what we know about the brain. We've been studying those things for so much longer that there's constantly new information about gut health, which again, I think is why doctors are super dismissive of a stool test, because they're like, well, we don't know enough. Well, yeah, we don't know everything, but it doesn't mean that they're not useful, because if they were not useful, when I looked at a stool test, interpreted it, and put clients on a really strategic protocol for it, they would not get better. Like the nuances there, it's not like, oh, I told them to stop eating fast food because of the stool test and then they got better. You could be like, well, it's probably because they stopped eating fast food, right? It's not that situation. It's that we see a particular bug or a particular pattern and we address that. And then not only if we do a retest for stool testing, which we don't always do, but if we did, we see improvements in what we were trying to improve and their symptoms improved. So you can say all day long that we don't have enough information. Well, yeah, we're never going to know everything about the gut microbiome, but it doesn't mean that the tools we have now aren't valid, because they are. And so the stool test itself can show us, what good bacteria is growing, what bad bacteria is growing. It will assess kind of the levels. So you'll see, okay, well, I have all the good bacteria present, but they're all really low. Or, man, I just have a ton of bacteria. There's high good bacteria. There's high bad bacteria. It'll look at viruses. It even looks at like parasitic infections. Some are better than others at picking that up. But that's not even what we see the most common issue. And then it also looks at things like digestion. So do you have enough pancreatic enzymes to break down food? Are you malabsorbing fat? What is are there inflammatory markers that are high? So it really is so beneficial because it allows us to take a super streamlined approach, which gets you healing faster. And I know that your next question is, yeah, but Brittany, like, how is the stool test working? And now I'm going to tell you all about
me,
how
a friend wants to know, not me, but he may be curious. I mean, how does this go down? How do you do this?
It's so glamorous. It's very glamorous. So here's the situation. We order a test. It comes to your doorstep. Now I want to order you a stool test. Comes to your doorstep, and then you produce a sample, if you will, when you go to the ballpark and the hot dog boat, the paper.
I do know where you were taking this. Okay, please continue. Yes.
The little paper boat they serve a hot dog in. Okay, that's what they give you. And then you collect the stool sample in said hot dog boat. Okay. And then there's a little tube and the lid has a little tiny shovel on it. And you literally get a sample from each part of the poo, the front, the middle, the end. You want to get a sampling from all the different parts. And then you put it in this tube that's full of water and you shake it up to make poop water. And then you send it in.
Okay. And I know it's a bit of a weird question, but let's say that a person had diarrhea, for example. Does that still work, or is that different? I mean, good
question. So it does invalidate. So the test that we use, we love GI Map by Diagnostic Solutions, and having a runny stool actually makes it really difficult to get accurate answers. So that's a little bit tricky. Usually my clients can tell if it's going to be a pretty loose stool, and I tell them to hold off and do it on the next sampling. But yeah, you do want it to be somewhat formed to get the
Okay.
best results. But
It is actually pretty simple then. I was having different pictures in my mind, I guess.
yeah,
And it's
you just
just an
poop into a
at-home
hot
test.
dog dish
And then you
Mhm.
just shove it in the mail and send it off. And then I guess the question I have after that is, would the bacteria die being sent in the mail? How
Yeah,
does that work?
good question. So it's sent very quickly. So it is priority mail. So it gets to the lab very fast. And the liquid, like it preserves the sample. In the liquid that you make the poop water out of, there's something in there that can preserve
Some kind
it.
of preservative.
Again,
Okay.
it's not going to be perfect, right? And there are certain bugs that when they're exposed to oxygen will die. So, when we're doing a stool test, we're not saying these are the only bugs that are in your gut. No, these are the bugs that we know about, that we have research for, and that we can survive in this environment, right? So I think that's important to understand. Again, you have to have a practitioner who understands what a stool test can show and what it cannot show, right? A stool test is never going to diagnose SIBO. You need a breath test for that. But even within breath testing, there's a lot of inaccuracies. If you do this particular
And you actually
substrate,
take people for
yeah.
breath tests too? Like that's also something you sometimes
Mhm.
recommend?
Yep. So sometimes I don't test them. I used to run them all the time, but there are a lot of inaccuracies in the SIBO breath testing world, depending on the substrate that you use. So the way that works is you drink a solution and then you breathe into a tube several intervals. There's like a couple hour test, there's 3 hour test. And then they're measuring the gas production is what they're doing, because we know that particular bacteria or particular type of bugs can produce a particular type of gas. And if there's a lot of gas production, it means that potentially there's some overgrowth. There's a lot of bugs that are producing that gas. But again, there's some inaccuracies. So if you use lactulose, for example, as what you're drinking, you run the risk of false positives. And if you're constipated, which a lot of people who take a SIBO breath test have constipation and bloating as a symptom, you run the risk of false positives. So if you get a test, you might look at it and be like, well, okay, it's positive, but you're constipated. So then it's like, well, what was the utility of the test? Because you're still going to question the results. On the flip side, if you use glucose as the substrate, you run the risk of false negatives. So if I run a test on a client who I really think has SIBO and they use glucose as the substrate and it's a negative, I'm like, was it a false negative? So it's I stopped testing because I was questioning the results. And I found really great success with just looking at symptoms, looking at their history and saying, this is a slam dunk for SIBO. Let's move forward with kind of a more of a natural approach and see if you see symptom improvement. And then I just saved you $300 on a test.
Amen. Yeah.
Right?
And so,
Yeah.
I love geeking out with you, and I know that you're into the research too. We can
Yeah.
talk about this like we do so often, but I guess my question is, moving away from the science right now, a person that's just gone through the summit, a person that's listening to this right now, what would you say are things that they can do immediately, some kind of actual action plan that they can follow through to help them with their gut plan? What advice would you give the general audience member?
So it's going to go back to what we talked about before. We can do a lot of fancy gut testing and supplement protocols, but I don't want to do that until your foundations are rock solid. I want you to focus on your nutrition. I want you to sleep. I want you to manage your stress. Those are so paramount. And within the nutrition piece, it's getting a variety of foods in. So each particular type of fiber in each food feeds a different type of bacteria in your gut. So if you're down to 10 foods, the test that I run, the stool test that I run on clients who have had restricted diets, have the worst good bacteria levels in their gut because you've taken away their food,
Makes
right? So even low FODMAP is a super popular diet that is recommended for anyone with IBS. Well, it's really restrictive. And those high FODMAP foods are quite literally the food that your good bacteria eat. So if you're no longer eating them, yeah, you might have symptom improvement, but it's because those good bacteria are dying. They're not digesting anything anymore. And so what you get is that false sense of improvement, that false sense of healing, and it's actually doing damage in the long term. So that's a whole nother misconception. Again, what sets us apart is we don't do low FODMAP diets. Sometimes we will for symptom improvement. If you are completely miserable, I want you to feel the best possible right away, knowing it's a Band-Aid approach. So I might say, hey, if you know for sure you are reacting to garlic, just leave it out for now. We'll add it back in a couple weeks. right? So I'm never going to recommend something that like is going to make you miserable. But I am very clear about when I'm recommending something that's more of a Band-Aid approach versus this is a long-term approach. And you can have both, right? We have both all the
Put out the
time.
immediate fires as such, right?
Exactly. So, when we're looking at the diet and things to implement now, again, thinking of variety, thinking of color, you want the most color possible, getting adequate protein. Your body to heal and repair and build tissue needs adequate protein. So it's really looking at that. And if you're like Brittany, there's no possible way I can add in any fiber because I'm miserable when I eat it. Okay, well, for you, you need a root cause. You need to probably test things now, because if your gut issues are getting in the way of you eating a diet that is appropriate for you, you need to dig into the actual gut issue, right? So sometimes we have to go backwards. If I'm trying to get nutrition foundations here, but you literally can't tolerate even a sip of water, well, yeah, we are going to kind of work backwards and maybe do testing first and a protocol first and then come back to the nutrition. So it's kind of nuanced there, but that really is it. I mean, managing stress, focusing on eating environment is huge. So are you eating on the run? Are you not chewing your food? Are you just like shoveling it in so fast? Well, of course, your gut is not going to digest appropriately. So it's those basic things, eating slow, chewing to an applesauce consistency. I want you to really focus on those things first, because that alone can fix 50% of your gut issues. And it's easier said than done, right? Because people know they need to eat more plants. People know they need to manage their stress. And that's literally exactly why I created our gut health community, our gut healing community. It's for the people who are like, I know exactly what to do. I just cannot do it for the life of me, right? I need someone to boss me around, tell me what to do. And that's not exactly what we do, but we give them a really streamlined approach, and they actually get access to you as well in our shift community, so that not only are they addressing the nutrition piece, they're addressing the stress piece, but they're also addressing what's going on up here. And they're questioning the stories they're telling themselves. And you help them so much with even just, we had that beautiful live session with one of our community members about feeling like her body was broken. And for so many of my clients with gut issues, they feel like their body has betrayed them, that they are broken, that something about this is their fault. And there's so much up here that has to be dealt with to find that true healing. And so that community is just so powerful, because not only can we get you on the road to gut healing, but we also change literally everything about the way you're living your life.
You've already spoken about that a bit. I'm guessing that some people listening to this, they've just tried a lot of things and they're just in a place of overwhelm as a whole, kind of thing, right? A person that's just literally has to put out fires because they just want to figure out what the heck, how to live a normal life again, right? Like not even something crazy. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts around dealing with overwhelm? Is it a matter of joining a community like that? Or is it a matter of, before you even think of that, right away, deal with your sleep or vitamin B, or I don't know what you would say, kind of thing? Where would you take it?
I would say if you're like Brittany, gun to your head, tell me one thing, right? Yeah. Just the one thing that I can do. Yeah, exactly. I know that's what you were thinking. It's stress. And that shocks so many people. They think it's going to be take that probiotic, do this supplement, magnesium, colostrum. No, it's managing your stress. Your body, specifically your gut, will not operate optimally when you are stressed. It's not even in the cards. You can have the most beautiful microbiome, and if you are stressed, your body will not digest the food you are eating, and you will not absorb those nutrients, and you will have nutrient deficiencies, which then create other issues like fatigue and brain fog and other bodily symptoms. And I want you to be happy, right? All of my clients, I'm like, gosh, this life was meant to be enjoyed. And your gut issues are getting in the way of that, but also your constant running around as a little stress ball. You're not focusing on what brings you joy. You're not focusing on the people around you and the connections and just the beautiful things around you, because you're so stuck up here. And it's like, again, as much as we do gut healing and we do nutrition, man, the biggest, I want people to understand, you get to take time for you each day. Your body was not meant to run on stress hormones. So even, the adaptogens, and everyone's talking about cortisol and it's this hot button thing. But sure, you can take a supplement for your high cortisol, but don't you want to just stop having high cortisol? Don't you want to just stop spiking it? And it's bonkers to me because it's like there's these influencers that are selling this adaptogen. It's perfect for your adrenals. And this is, perfect if you're stressed. And I'm like, well, is nobody talking about the fact that we shouldn't be living our lives stressed? And there's a difference between stressors and how you're reacting to the stressors. You will never have a life that is free of stressors, right? Like things will happen, especially if you have kids. They're constantly doing things that you're like, why? Why? Right? But how you're reacting to them is what is within your control. That is what is within your power. And you have to pay attention to that, which is also why we created the Shift community. And that's where our collaboration comes in, because I saw this thing that, like, again, clients are coming to me for gut healing and for nutrition, and there weren't great resources for not only stress management, but again, the mindset piece of, do you even think you can heal? Do you think this is possible? Because if you don't think that's possible, you don't need a stool test and a supplement protocol. You need a mindset shift. And then you need a stool test and a supplement protocol or whatever that is. But it's hard for me to, again, the people who are like, no, just give me the thing, give me the supplement protocol. Well, no, we need to change the environment. And that really starts with mindset.
Amen, sister. I just got to say, it's just in the short period that we've actually gotten as close as we have. The thing I love is I can geek out with you and you can go into like the depths of like everything to do about bacteria and like the tests and read through them and everything else. But like the thing that really I believe sets you apart and that makes me just so grateful to have you in my life is the fact that you actually do look at things so holistically. And your biggest thing is, I just want to see people smile again, right? I just want to see people happy again. And when I get that, everything in their life shifts too. I can do the science. Now let's also do the mental part. And I just think that that is absolutely beautiful. And I just love the way I'm seeing the shifts happening with people in our community. And I'm pretty sure that people listening to this will easily see that that is what you're all about.
I hope so. I hope so.
I just genuinely want to thank you for this time together. This has been really, really helpful, Brittany. Thank you so much.
So glad. I think we said it all. I think, the biggest thing that I want people to understand truly is that if you feel like something is off, you have to continue to work to find somebody who's going to dig for you. Like, stop allowing yourself to be dismissed by providers. Because I hear this all the time. You go to your doctor with all of these symptoms that we're talking about, right? And your doctor says, it's just your IBS. Because once you've been labeled with IBS, which by the way is a syndrome, it's not a disease. A syndrome means it's diagnosed by a group of symptoms. It tells you nothing about what's actually going on, which is why we are able to reverse IBS, because it was never a disease. It's a group of symptoms, and we can influence symptoms, right? So, if you are complaining, I feel, I look 6 months pregnant by the end of the day. I have constant stomach aches. I have acne on my back. I have brain fog so bad that I cannot get through a work day. I need a nap every day. And your doctor, again, says to you, oh, it's just your IBS. You're a mom. You're busy. No, it is not true. If you know that something is off, you need to do something about it. And if you're having really severe symptoms, there is a reason. There is something that's off in your body, because your body doesn't just look 6 months pregnant with bloating for no reason. There's something that is causing that. And that is the biggest thing. Whether you work with me and my team or whoever else you find that aligns with what you want, you just please never stop looking for answers, because there are answers. And there are people who will find that for you.
Brittany, so beautifully put. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks for being